Hey there, entrepreneurs. My name is Sushant, and welcome to TrepTalks. This is the show where I interview successful e-commerce entrepreneurs, business executives, and thought leaders, and ask them questions about their business story, and also dive deep into some of the strategies and tactics that they have used to start and grow their businesses. And today, I'm really excited to welcome Alex Withero to the show. Alex is the founder of Car Rental University. Car Rental University helps anyone start a side hustle or a full-on car rental company, renting cars out for money. And today I'm going to ask Alex a few questions about his entrepreneurial journey and some of the strategies and tactics that he has used to start and grow his business. So Alex, thank you so much for joining me today at Trep Talks. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Sorry, I forgot to ask about the correct pronunciation of your last name. So I don't know if I butchered if I butchered it or if
You
it
did.
was
No, you got it right. It's Alex Withrow. So
okay.
it's a very, very English name.
Cool, cool. So I know, just before we started, you were sharing that, your YouTube channel and Car Rental University, that's kind of your side hustle, but you're now involved in the in some sort of a startup. So do you want to share a little bit about all the things that you do?
Yeah. So I'll kind of give you the trajectory of my journey in the car rental space. So if you've been following my YouTube channel from which started about 2.5 years ago, you know that I've been in the car rental space and running rentals since 2016. I used to live in New York City. I bought 5 cars up in the New York City area. I rented them out to Uber drivers. The reason why I did this is because I actually had a taxi and limousine commission license. I was a licensed taxi driver in New York City for about 8 months. And the reason I got out of it is because I saw the rental companies making so much money renting cars to Uber drivers, and I thought, well, I'd rather be on that side of the fence than the
Hmm.
than the driving side. Um, so so I started, I started a car rental business, had about 5 cars pretty early on, rented them out to Uber drivers. The whole idea of asset share was relatively new at the time. Really, the reason I pivoted into cars is because I used to run an Airbnb operation in Manhattan, had about 3 or 4 apartments, but they outlawed Airbnb in New York City. But I loved
Hmm.
the whole idea of asset share. I loved the passivity of it.
Hmm.
And so I didn't really want to give up that lifestyle. And obviously, when you live in New York City, everything's very expensive. So you have to keep finding ways to make money somehow. And so after Airbnb got outlawed, basically I moved from apartments to cars. And I saw the amount. I mean, I remember seeing tower rentals in Long Island City. There was a line down the block of Uber drivers in line waiting to rent TLC plated cars. And I thought to myself, well, man, all I need is just crumbs off the table of this industry, and I can make myself a very nice living. And that's
Hmm.
basically what I did. And so, I didn't really want to deal with the TLC system, so I moved my operation into Jersey City. Probably that was by 2017, 2018. And so I was mainly working with New Jersey drivers. So I wasn't working with TLC drivers. So if you're from the New York City area, you probably understand that delineation.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, so from there, this was very early in the game, car sharing game. This was, Turo was around, but I mean, this is back when Turo was relay rides. This was very kind of pre Getaround. Getaround was going in San Francisco, but I did join their pilot program in summer of 2020 in North Jersey.
Hmm.
I actually found their system really effective and solid and very profitable right off the bat. So it was a solid pilot run, I would say. Um, so I've had experience, running cars on all platforms. I've been familiar with HyreCar since probably 2017. I've done, Turo some since probably 2021 or so, and I've done Getaround since 2020. And so I've had exposure to pretty much every car share platform. I started in this business as doing private rentals, mainly doing long-term private rentals to Uber drivers. So that is, I very much developed my own proprietary system on how to do rentals to drivers.
Hmm.
2.5 years ago, I started my YouTube channel and an aligned consulting business. I developed a few courses online about how to start fleets on Getaround, how to start fleets on private rentals. Obviously, I do quite a few consultations even to this day. And then, probably I want to say back in as of this past November, December, I sold a minority share of my YouTube channel to a private equity firm called
Hmm.
Kairos Capital Resources.
Hmm.
And they asked me to join their team to run operations for what is called now Kairos Mobility Ventures. And
Hmm.
so we have set up operations in Boston, and I run the Boston team, and I'm in charge of the nationwide rollout from an operations standpoint.
And is this Kairos Mobility Venture, is this really just um, a full-fledged car rental business, or is this some sort of like a digital component to car rental uh, business?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say there are some, it is a car rental business, but there are some nuances that make it, I would say, unique. So obviously we are a clean mobility focused company. We are an EV first company. We are the gas fleets that we do run or in our co-hosting program, we are planning to convert over to electric vehicles. So there certainly is an environmental element to this venture. And I think really the real opportunity is making it very. I've developed a system, and I won't go too much into it yet, but I've developed a system that will make it very simple and easy for Uber drivers to want to use electric vehicles to drive for Uber, whether they're going, 8 to 12 hours a day.
Hmm.
There are some, I know Uber drivers very well. I've dealt with them for many, many years. Every time I sit in an Uber, I have a conversation with the driver about something because I always want to pick their brains on what they're thinking about different topics
Hmm.
and what it's like to drive. And, I was previously a driver as well in New York City. So, in my own opinion, I think there is a way to really make Uber fleets totally electric, and a way in which that will really incentivize drivers to get on board with it.
Hmm. I mean, electric is an interesting topic, and
Sure.
maybe I'll go into it a little bit later because I know recently I was reading some news from Hertz, which is the car rental company, obviously,
Right.
and they were selling all their entire electric
Huge sell
fleet
off.
because
Yep. They've had a
because
huge
it
sell
was,
off.
yeah. So maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later, but
Yeah,
it's
I have a
interesting.
lot of opinions about that, so I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've thought through the profitability and the whole business model of that. So we'll chat about it. But I'm interested to know, you obviously I'm in Canada, and the car sharing landscape in Canada is more limited than the US. Of course, you named quite a few different players: Turo, Getaround, HyreCar, so forth. In Canada, I think there's only Turo, and then I think Uber Carshare is now just coming up. Um, so there's definitely different kind of business models, and you said that you were focused more on sharing or renting your car to Uber drivers, but obviously Turo is a slightly different model, and when I look at Uber Carshare, it's a little bit different way of renting it out. Um, what if somebody is trying to create just a side hustle versus like create a full-fledged business, like which business model is you would recommend? Is it better to go after Uber
Yeah.
drivers?
Um, so I'm going to say I'm going to give you an answer. It's going to be a little frustrating to your audience, but I'm going to say it totally depends.
Hmm.
Depends on what kind of lifestyle you want to have. It depends on what kind of cars you want to buy. Depends if you want to do luxury. Depends if you want to do non-luxury or economy cars. Exotics is a whole different game. Depends on how profitable you want to be. Depends on how much liability you're willing to absorb from an insurance standpoint. Uber drivers are very lucrative. Everyone knows that, but Uber drivers are also a headache. So it's a system that I've spent many years perfecting and developing safeguards to kind of keep, be able to ride the dragon effectively, so to speak. But I always say to people, you don't want to deal with Uber drivers right off the bat if you're new to this, because it's a very complicated system. However, if you're new to this, if you just want to kind of dip your toe in the water, I mean, I think that Turo and Getaround are very safe ways to start. That's where I would direct a newbie. Um, you know, Turo gives a lot of flexibility in terms of how to run fleets. I would say, you can take cash cars and cheap cars and do well with them on Turo. You can take more luxury cars on Turo. You can do exotics on Turo. So there's a lot of, flexibility in the type of car. In my opinion, Getaround is better suited for economy vehicles. And you just have to understand the clientele that comes to Getaround and Turo. So Turo's renters are typically a little more high end. They expect a little more of a better experience. That when they pick up that car, they want it very squeaky clean, no blades of grass on the carpet, everything wiped down, gas full, no, maintenance lights on. They want kind of the same condition in which they would get it if they were picking up a car from Hertz or Enterprise, right? Whereas, Getaround renters, Getaround gives you a little more, I would say, convenience in terms of typically being able to pick up a car in a downtown area in a city. So if you are someone who lives in New York City or San Francisco or Boston, and you already live in an urban center, and you just need a car for a day or for a weekend, Getaround's very convenient, and it's really more designed for urbanites. And so I think that and they just kind of want something that moves. If there's like, a piece of trash in the console, that's like, it's not a big deal to most, Getaround renters. So the ratings system, I would say, is a little easier on Getaround. It's a little more hands off. Whereas the rating system is a lot tougher on Turo. But I mean, everyone kind of has to find what they really like and what is their style. I mean, if you go on YouTube, I can show you, 100 different Turo channels. But I've never really wanted to make my YouTube channel about Turo, frankly, because I'm not a huge Turo guy. I mean, it's just never really been my favorite platform. I find the clientele kind of annoying. I like the passivity of Getaround, but I know that Getaround is more of a regional player. I mean, it's definitely obviously from a company revenue standpoint, it's a fraction of what Turo is, and it's really more designed for downtown areas and major cities. So really depends on where you live, depends on how much money you have to put down on cars, how, your credit, and do you want to have 1 to 2 cars? Do you want to have 5 to 10 cars? All this, there's a lot of components that you have to think about. These are the kind of things I talk with people about all the time. So like when I talk with someone about who wants to get into this business, I really customize a plan based on their finances and based on their lifestyle choices.
To me, I think I share a little bit that I started on Turo just sharing one car right now, and I started maybe a month and a half ago. And my experience has been that this is definitely a capital intensive business. Of course, you need to have a car up front. And it's also to a certain extent is a resource intensive, like, at least renting your car on Turo, as you said, you want to make sure that your car is clean. So after every trip, you need to figure out a system to clean the car. And then I also find, like, the clientele, it's a hit or miss. Somebody can treat your car like complete garbage, and other person can, treat it a little bit better. I know Turo is good in terms of claims process and so forth, but if somebody, let's say, is thinking of starting a Turo business, and they spend like buying a new 35, 40 grand car, the value of
Yeah.
the car in 1 year will be very low, and the earnings, I don't think there's going to be a huge return on that investment. So that seemed like a bit of a challenge. I mean, what has been your experience, and how do you kind of navigate your clients
Yeah.
with
So
this kind of a?
I wouldn't go out and just drop $40,000 on a high-end car and then just, rent it out for $1,000 a month, to get, I mean, that doesn't make sense. So, and I think that's kind of what the criticism of Turo is that a lot of people do that, and that's just the wrong way to handle it. First of all, I would, I mean, if you can finance a car, then finance it, basically, I mean, how I started in this industry, obviously the lending than it is now. But at the time, I mean, I was putting, $1,000 down on a car and just had about a 400 monthly payment
Hmm.
on Honda Accords and renting those out to Uber drivers. So, I mean, I was cash flow positive within 3 weeks. And so, and obviously, when you're renting out to an Uber driver, it is a kind of situation where you're dealing with a lot more mileage. Uber drivers on average probably drive about 5,000 miles a month. It depends on the city you're in. When I was up in New York City, it's a much more condensed city, so it's not as bad mileage wise. And
Hmm.
actually, the drivers in New York are very good. I mean, New York City is the 36th least accident prone city in the nation. Whereas when I moved down to Atlanta, Atlanta's the sixth most accident prone city in the nation. So I had multiple accidents and crashes when I got to Atlanta with my fleet. But I think it's the kind of thing where you have to really understand the finances of this. You have to, and some people want to buy, they want to buy, put cash down on cars and just make it back. And then some people don't. So my general feeling is, if you can borrow, then do it, because it'll make you cash flow positive, or if you can lease, I think that's the better way to go for my taste. But I mean, if you had um, $20,000 just to kind of use, I would probably start off with maybe buying, two cheaper $10,000 cars, maybe like a used Toyota Prius or Camry or something like that.
Hmm.
And then, get out there and just start renting those for cash, and just making the profit. And then you can tack on loans later. But I mean, I think in this business, you will have to deal with some component of loans. That's really what is, I would say, holding this industry back in general is the lack of capital infusion. Now, that said, I mean, if you're someone that knows this business very well, um, technically speaking, you cannot use an auto loan for car sharing. I mean, that has been made known. That's starting to change a little. Like BMW now is offering leases and loans that go towards car share.
Hmm.
But this is still something that getting financing for car sharing is a very difficult thing still. A lot of hosts are using cars that are on leases, and are technically violating their lease by putting it on Carshare, or I mean, this
Hmm.
is like super common in the industry. I hate to say it, but it just is,
Hmm.
because people are just not going to throw down $80,000 on a car just for Carshare. It's just not going to happen. So, and I would say this is one of the main issues that has really impeded the growth of this industry. It's just a lack of capital, and hosts and fleets are not able to grow quickly.
That's very interesting. I mean, it's almost like, you are betting on the car, because mechanically, if the car, you get a car and, different kind of people are driving it, and the car decides to, I mean,
Mhm.
that's obviously maintenance issues that you have to deal with. You still have to change the oil, you still have to do all the maintenance things. If
Right.
something starts to sound, then you have to obviously look at it. Um, But you mentioned, some Toyota cars. Do you have a preference for, like, if somebody is going into car sharing, obviously Toyota, Honda probably from a reliability perspective are better choices than, something like Ford or so. Do you have any recommendations for,
Yeah, I always say you got to have. So my big thing, the really kind of the thing that I talk about on my channel quite a bit is the car has to have dual use case. So it has to be something that would want to be used by vacation retail renters. So if somebody just pulls into your town and wants to rent a car for a couple days for vacation, it has to have appeal from that standpoint. And I would
Hmm,
say it also needs to have appeal to an Uber driver. And so if a car has dual use case,
hmm,
the car will always rent. It will always rent. You'll never have an issue. So like, for example, I've always been a big fan of Honda Accords. Um, when I was in Atlanta, my Honda Accords were on Getaround on a pretty regular basis. They were in the Drive with Uber program on Getaround. They got rented on that quite a bit. They got rented just by retail, renters quite a bit. But if I ever had a problem, if it started getting slow, throughout November, December, January, which is pretty common in the car sharing industry, I would give it to an Uber driver for 3 or 4 months. And in that scenario, then you can start pulling 450 a week, and you've got, all of a sudden, Uber season is very high during winter months, and you've got a cash flow solution that's going to be way better than, what you would make on Getaround or Turo during the winter. So I always say too that you cannot go into this business only understanding one car share platform, and that is a huge
hmm,
mistake everyone makes. They come into this business, they throw way too much cash down on cars, and they only know how to use Turo. And if that
hmm,
is your scenario, you're going to lose money. Like that's
hmm,
just the reality of the game. So you have to
hmm.
know all the plays in the playbook, and you have to understand how each one, when it's appropriate to use each car share platform. And so that's what I would say is a very important component in this business.
No, I think that's definitely an essential advice because it probably also depends on what city, what region you are in, because some cities
Exactly.
are
Yep.
small and so your utilization is going to be low. And so you have to, if you want to do this as like a business, as your main thing, you
Yep.
definitely need to be in the right market. You need to know the different platforms and so forth to really get the utilization rate high. Um,
Absolutely. I mean, and on my YouTube channel, at the beginning of every video, I say download my PDF, which comes with what's called the Car Share Growth Guide. And that gives literally a breakdown of city by city, which car share platform is strongest by zip code. And this is very important information because if you're in Dallas or if you are in Los Angeles or especially like San Diego, like Getaround's not going to be effective in like San Diego. It's decent in LA and it's fairly weak in Dallas. But if you're in Dallas, Turo is fantastic. So different markets. For example, I'm in Miami. There's barely any Getaround in Miami, whereas Turo is pretty strong here. So it really just depends on which market you are in.
so I am in Toronto and I live in pretty much like pretty within the city. So I'm definitely in within the Toronto city.
Yeah,
And
you're in one of the pilot cities for car share.
I'm sorry?
You're in one of the pilot cities for Uber car share.
Yeah, I mean, Toronto, definitely there's a few million people here. It's a crowded
Yep.
city. Um, but I mean, I guess my question would be if you were telling me like, I put like a 2016. So what I did was, I got a car. So I purchased a car which I think is good value for the price. Looks nice,
Mhm.
red color, 2016 Nissan Altima. It's a sedan, and I financed it, right? So on a personal name.
Yep.
So and I'm trying to get it cash flow positive. I mean, it is cash flow positive now, but still, how I don't think my utilization rate is great. Like, what would you recommend to me, someone like me? Um, I mean, the only way I have figured out, so I've made my availability, anytime basically, and but I find that if I have to get my car rented on a consistent basis, I really have to play on the on the price. What
Yeah, yeah.
do you know any other tricks of the trade?
Well, I would say, it's a couple things. So, and I assume you're in Toronto, you're running this on Turo, is that correct?
True, yes.
Okay, so I don't think there's a get around in Toronto, is that correct?
There isn't, no. There's Uber
Yeah, I didn't
Carshare.
think I didn't. Yeah, yeah. Uber Carshare is new. So you could try it on Uber Carshare. I know that they've had somewhat of a slow rollout just because they're trying to calibrate still who they want to let and not let rent the cars. So I know that's still kind of a little slow going. But I would say that in your situation, a couple things you can do. I mean, what I always say to people is you can always just if you go to imapping.com, you can create like a Google Maps link for your cars. So if you want to, you can basically put a Google Map link to your car that says like car rental business or car rental whatever. So
Hmm.
if people go searching for car rentals on Google Maps, they'll find your car as the way to rent. You just put in your Turo link in there and they can book your car straight through Turo, straight off of Google Maps. That's a very easy thing to do. I'm not telling you that's going to change your revenue overnight, but
Hmm.
I will tell you that it certainly could give you a 10 to 15% bump. You
Hmm.
know, another thing is, I would say that in that scenario, you can also, if you really want to, you always have the option to pump a little advertising money behind it, that sort of thing. Obviously, yeah, it has to make sense to make money with regards to
Yeah.
putting that money in. Obviously, you want to get more money back. That's one option as well if you want to keep it on Turo. Obviously, as you said, the playing on the price is the most obvious option you have on Turo. And then, I mean, if you want to learn how to deal with Uber drivers, that's another way to deal with it. Is if you find a long-term renter on an Uber who's a driver in the city, just wants to use your car as for Uber Eats or Uber for passengers, that is an option as well.
No, I think that's great advice. I think basically what you're saying is, in addition to the traffic that Turo is bringing to my car, I can basically go out and
Mhm.
try to get more eyeballs in
Yeah,
front of
there
the
are there
right
are
people.
ways to manipulate that component, which most people that's not really talked about that often in this industry. But
Yeah.
when you talk with like the enterprise account managers at Getaround or whatnot, I mean that's kind of what they do with their large clients.
Hmm. So let's chat a little bit about scaling the business, right? So somebody like
Mhm.
me that has kind of, I'm learning the ropes, I'm learning the pitfalls, I'm learning the claims process, the insurance aspect
Yep.
of things, all those things. Um, I think the biggest challenge that I'm like, even if I go out and buy another car, let's say, figure out, I get another SUV, let's say, the big challenge for me is where do I park it? Right? Like if I want
Right.
to, uh, grow my fleet, I think that's a big question. Where do I park it? And of course,
Yeah.
every time you buy a new car, you still have to pay insurance. You still have to. So there's definitely a resource component to that,
Right.
like the
Right.
the cost. What do you suggest someone who like? How does one go from renting out or sharing one car to sharing, let's say, five cars?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, there's scaling and there's scaling, right? So I'm friends with some of the largest fleet operators in the peer-to-peer hosting space in the country. I know a gentleman in Las Vegas. It was about 210 cars. Um, I know, a couple guys, a couple of my clients have 25, 30, 50 cars, a couple around there. I mean, I think so there's a couple components to this, right? There's the financing component, there's the insurance component, there is the systems operations component, right? Just, keeping the cars properly clean, keeping it all organized. That's basically what I deal with currently
Hmm.
for Kairos Mobility, as we are, planning to scale up to a couple hundred cars in, a matter of 4 or 5 months.
Hmm.
So I will say this, I'll talk about insurance first. From an insurance standpoint, um, it just kind of depends what you want to do, what the game plan is. So if you're just putting the cars on Turo, that's not too difficult from an insurance standpoint, because really all you need is to cover the car while the car is just sitting in the parking lot.
Hmm.
As soon as a renter gets into that car, it goes on to Turo's insurance.
Hmm.
So in that scenario, they have a policy what's called Period X. I recommend ABI's Period X policy. It just covers when the car is sitting.
Hmm.
If you are using that car in a dual use case scenario where maybe that car is a personal car that you use for yourself, you maybe use it to commute, but you want to rent it out on the weekends. In that scenario, I would say just get a normal personal insurance plan, and when you use that car on Turo, if there's an issue with the car while it's on Turo, just file the claim through Turo.
Hmm.
You don't need to file the claim with your personal insurance in that scenario. But so there's a lot of different kind of scenarios and use cases of how to insure, how to calibrate insurance to your specific situation, right?
Hmm.
So I would say that getting up to 5 cars, I mean, it's really the insurance gets a lot easier, I would say, when you get up to 25 cars and more, because at that point the mid-level and large carriers of insurance are much more willing to play with you and insure a large fleet, because they have a large pool that diversifies the risk.
Hmm.
They're not really interested, that level of insurance is not really interested in working with someone who has under 25 cars.
Hmm.
um, so if you're just trying to do 5 or 10 cars, the insurance situation's a little tricky. If the cars are just on Turo or Getaround, the insurance is not that hard. You pretty much just put them on that, Period X policy, and that usually will cover them, because that's a policy designed just for Carshare. But if you want to introduce Uber drivers into the equation, if you want, I mean, there's a lot of different ways this conversation can go. It gets a little more tricky when that component and liability is added into the equation. But like I said, it's the kind of thing where just going to 5 cars from an insurance standpoint is not too difficult. From an operations standpoint, I always say this: as soon as you have 2 cars, go get a cleaner on TaskRabbit.com and just have someone on speed dial that can go clean cars, and just tell them to go clean the car whenever you need to have it cleaned, right? So you always want to have kind of systems in place. There's mobile mechanics in every city. You can find a mobile mechanic on Google. They'll come out, they'll change your batteries, tires, do oil changes. They'll do it right on the spot for your car. So that's a resource you definitely want to take advantage of. You never, ever, ever want to take your car to the dealership to get repairs done. I mean, they're going to charge you double. The markup is just unbelievable. So,
For sure.
you want to have kind of and certainly find a good shop, because on occasion you're going to have to, find these things and have these repairs done, and you want to have someone you trust. And then obviously the capital acquisition to grow is a component. Like, how good's your credit? How much cash do you have? Can you leverage the cars that you have initially and use that cash flow to buy more cars? That's always, I think it is ideal to own cars outright, with cash. So if you can position yourself in a way where you're getting those cars with cash, that's ideal. But you really can't scale in this business without some level of loans and financing. It's just impossible.
For sure. What about just the location and just the parking aspect of it? I mean, I think
Yeah.
in Toronto, I'm in a good location. I'm getting bookings consistently, but I think if I find another location, if I for my second car, I would want to have it somewhere close to the airport, because I think that's a good location, and it can be something that's easily accessible. I mean, have you played with something, if somebody has 5 cars, to have them at 5 different locations that are considered to be high traffic or more lucrative in terms of where somebody would
Yeah.
want to have this kind of a thing, and
Yeah.
how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so this business is very location sensitive. You know, and that's half the battle is figuring out where to put the car so that it rents well, right? If you're doing Turo is a very airport centric app. So, most Turo hosts will say, hey, you've got to have a lot of your fleet over by the airport. It's a pretty common, you know, comment from Turo hosts. If you're working with someone who's pretty heavy deep in get around hosts will always tell you you got to have your cars in the downtown area. Like that's Getaround does have a tool that's a location zip code tool that basically you plug in the zip code you're interested in putting the car in, and it'll tell you like how good of a location that is, whether it's a tier one, tier two, tier three, tier four, or tier five zip code. So I always say if you're doing that with Getaround, you don't put your cars in anything other than tier one or tier two zip codes. Um, but there's Spot Hero. Spot Hero is a company that will find you parking spots. You can rent. Uber Carshare has a partnership with them. I know there's been promotions through Spot Hero with Uber Carshare to give discounts on parking spots. There's just a lot of creative ways to deal with parking. When I was in New York, I mean, look, I used to do this in New York City and North Jersey. I mean, that's a horrible area for parking. So part of the reason I like long-term Uber drivers and Uber renters is because they take the car home to their house at night. So I don't have to deal with parking. So that's
Mhm.
one way to solve parking. Another thing is, there are very creative ways you can do this. I used to, you know, be friends with the local manager at the, Safeway or grocery store and say, hey, what if I pay you like $100 a month and can I drop my cars in your lot and you don't call the tow company? He said yes. So look, like you have to get creative in this business. It's not always cut and dry. Like I hate to say it, but sometimes you got to pay people off. So when I was dealing with rentals up in New York City and New Jersey, it's kind of a very common kind of situation. But so there's solutions. You have to be creative. You have to think out of the box. But I don't settle for a $300 parking spot each month. That makes no sense. You got to be more creative than that.
Correct, correct. I mean, that brings me to my next question. I mean, to me, it seems like this is a very capital intensive and, overhead cost intensive kind of a business. So, um, do you recommend somebody get into this kind of like a car rental business unless like you want to make that
Yeah, it's
100%?
this it it's totally it's still it is. I mean, look, I mean, it's getting more popular. The margins are compressing, as is true with any industry, but it's still profitable. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't profitable. So, you just look, but like I said, you got to know all the tricks in the playbook. You got to understand this business very well to get to do it. For example, you brought up Hertz before. Hertz was taking brand new Teslas and trying to just rent them on a day rate. That's not going to work. And I'm not surprised to see that they, sold them all off. Like if you're going to do Tesla Model 3s, you got to use those with Uber drivers because that's where the margin is the sweetest, and it's got to be a used Tesla. Like you can't do a brand new Tesla. The economics don't make sense.
Hmm.
So I mean, there is nuance to this that I feel like a lot of people just don't understand, and even Hertz. So they're not immune to screwing up. So I think that you have to understand that certain types of cars and certain models are optimal for certain platforms, and in terms of like I said, like I've always kind of built a large portion of my business around long-term Uber drivers because the money's so good, right? It's like if you have a real estate portfolio and you have long-term renters in
Hmm.
a property, like it's going to pay well, and it's going to pay consistently over time. But you also do have the option to do like a short-term Airbnb type thing with properties. It's the same exact, mindset. So personally, I like to diversify between the two, depending on the time of year. We're obviously right now coming into summer months. This is a great time of year on Turo and, Getaround where you're going to get those day rates around $70 to $100 per day.
Hmm.
So, this is kind of the time of year where nobody's, really stressed about getting bookings. But I mean, you just have to understand that just running this business on Turo or just running this business on Getaround, you're not going to last the long run in it.
Yeah, for sure. And there's definitely a bit of a learning curve, right? To learn all those tricks of the trade and learn all the, ins and
Absolutely.
outs.
And this, I would say this business, it's deceptively more complex than it looks from the outside.
For sure. I've learned
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what is the exit strategy? Like someone who's doing, let's say, two to five cars on Turo, let's say, on a small scale, right? Do you recommend that the car that they are um, renting out, if it has run its course, let's say, they have rented it out and, the car is now 200,000 kilometers, 250,000 kilometers or something like that. Do you
Yeah.
recommend that at what point should someone sell that car and basically replace it with another one?
Well, I would say the car will tell you when it's done. So either it's breaking down all the time or somebody totals it. One or the other will happen first. So you honestly, you really don't have to think too much about this because at some point the car basically tells you when it's done. Eventually, you rent out a car. I mean, honestly, if you rent out a car for 5 years to renters, if it lasts 5 years, I mean, round of applause to that car because usually they're totaled by then.
Yeah, and it's not even about the car, right? It's really about the drivers. There's like different types of drivers. Some are good, some are bad, some are horrible.
Yeah, and
So
eventually someone's going to crash the car. I mean, that's kind of the thing you have to understand is that you have to go into this business with the mindset that you are buying an asset to produce cash. So, if you're putting your beloved Jetta up on Turo and then somebody crashes it, like bad idea. Like if you have an emotional attachment to this car, like don't rent it out on Carshare. I mean,
that is, yeah.
unfortunately, yeah, some of these cars get beat up on occasion. It is better on Turo. Turo's clientele takes pretty good care of cars, I would say. But if you venture out into Getaround or HyreCar, or especially if you give it to an Uber driver, there's going to be issues. There's going to be scrapes, cuts. People are going to blow out tires. People, I mean, look, I've probably been through 25 claims throughout my career with cars, and I mean, this is just part of the, you get it gets hit, you get it fixed, you move on, you keep going. But if that's going to affect you emotionally, you have to really kind of think about think about this and change your paradigm with this business.
That's the first lesson that I learned. You
Absolutely.
you
No,
can you
that's the
can't
first
be
lesson everyone learns.
you
Yeah,
can't be
you can't.
emotionally.
You gotta send that car down the river and then let it go emotionally because trust me, it's gonna take its hits.
For sure, for sure. I think I'm past that point now.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, this is great information. Thank you for sharing all of this. What's so? I mean, you're. It seems like you have a job. So are you still doing your own thing
Yeah.
on the side, or you're?
Yep. I've got it all. I run it all still. So I still run the YouTube channel, obviously. I still do consultations. I still work with new entrepreneurs. I've always, for myself, I've always felt very strongly that this is a business that can take you literally from nothing and at least get you into a place where you're making 8 to 10 grand a month.
Hmm.
That was my experience. And so I feel very strongly that, when I work with people in this business, like I really try to help them to give them very clear answers on how to make money. And obviously, I've worked with a variety of, I probably have, over 100 clients at this point. Um, and it's the sort of thing where, a lot of people I work with are relatively new to car sharing, like yourself. I do work with some of the larger players on occasion. Some of my clients are large exotics companies or larger fleets who are kind of trying to figure out how to scale and take their operations level to the next level. But Yeah, so I still certainly I still run the YouTube channel. I wouldn't say I'm not as focused now on developing e-commerce products as I used to be. And so that was a big focus of mine probably back in 2022, 2023. At this point, obviously, I'm building out a large fleet. We're launching in Boston. We already did launch in Boston, but we're trying to get up to about 50 cars in the next 2 months. So, I mean, that's really my focus right now. So yes, to answer your question, I do have a proper job now, and I'm on the executive team with Kairos Mobility Ventures.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, this is great conversation. Like, I think, my thoughts on this is that this is, if someone is starting out and wants to learn business, I think this is a good way. There is a bit of an upfront cost, but I think it teaches you about business quite well. You understand what does a
Yeah.
business look like that has high overheads, that has um, high resource costs and so forth. And
Yeah, you have to really just, I mean, you have to really cut the expenses as much as possible in every single way that you can. Like I said, if you're paying $300 for parking, too much. Like that's ridiculous. If you're gonna do a financing agreement, if your financing agreement's at 900 or 1,000 a month, too much. It's just not, it's just not going to make sense. You've got to keep that financing agreement as low as possible. Ideally 400, 500, 600 a month. You have to educate yourself about all the insurance solutions, because in my experience, 70% of my consulting calls are people who have overinsured their car and they're overpaying on insurance. So I typically save people thousands of dollars just on a conversation about insurance.
Mm,
And so that's a real big issue in this industry, is the lack of knowledge about insurance.
for sure. Well, great conversation. If anybody wants to get in touch with you for your consultation or for advice or anything like that, besides consultations, like what other products or services do you offer?
Yeah, so I have a program all about how to scale a fleet on Getaround. It's called Getaround A to Z, from start to scale. I have a program all about how to build out systems and for Uber drivers, and how to create long-term private rental agreements. That's called the Private Agreement Playbook. Obviously, I do consultations. I have a private chat that's honestly super. Lots of great operators are on there. We have about 40 guys. Um, it's only $9 a month to be on the private chat. We have great discussions. You learn tons on there. If you go to just carrentalu.com, you'll find all my information there. And
Awesome.
obviously, Car Rental University is on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. You have some great YouTube videos as well. Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions as well. I usually do.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you have to answer them in like a word or a sentence or so. So the first one is,
Okay.
do you have any book recommendations for entrepreneurs?
I love $100 million Offers by Alex Hormozi.
Okay. Um, any product or idea that you are excited about in the current e-commerce, auto industry, digital industry
Yeah,
landscape?
the robo taxi network on Tesla. I'm so excited about it. I think it's gonna be so cool.
Robo
So when
taxi
they
network.
when they base yeah, yeah. So basically, when once NHTSA approves self-driving vehicles, and which is the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration with the U.S. government, once that is approved by the government, Tesla already has a system set up where you can take your Tesla and just kind of put it out on the robo taxi network, and it'll rent itself out for use.
I mean, that's an interesting topic, because I think the future, maybe 20 years down the road, when electric vehicles and the whole AI system of
Yeah.
self-driving and so forth is really built out, and the infrastructure is built out. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think there will be car renting. I think it's like a few companies really just owning these fleets
Yeah, I think it'll still be around. I think it's just going to look a little different.
yeah, we have to see. Any productivity tool or software or productivity tip that you would recommend?
For rentals, I would say Rental HQ software is pretty good. I would also recommend taking a look at Fleetio. That's Fleet.io. I think both of those platforms are solid for fleet management.
Okay, I didn't know about them. Another startup or business that you think is currently doing great things. It can be auto related. It could be anything else as well.
Um, well, I'm a little biased to our business, but that's the startup that's doing pretty well. But yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know. I mean, I've kind of tracked NVIDIA pretty closely. I think they're doing really interesting things in the AI space, and so um, I'm certainly interested in what they do in the future.
Yeah, NVIDIA had such a growth in the last year. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, a peer entrepreneur or business person whom you look up to or someone who inspires you?
I really like Elon Musk. I also really like Alex Hormozy, previously mentioned. I think they're both really great entrepreneurs, and obviously Elon is in the car space. Alex Hormozy is more in the e-commerce space. So, I mean, most people don't talk. I mean, I don't really talk about this a whole lot, but I had to learn a lot about e-commerce through Car Rental University, which most people obviously know me as a car guy, which I am, but I also know a lot about e-commerce as well, which I had to learn quietly to monetize my YouTube channel.
For sure. I mean, it's all about marketing at the end of the day, I think. And then, yeah,
Yeah, and sales funnels and all that good stuff.
yeah. Final question. What is the best business advice that you have ever received or you would give to other entrepreneurs?
I would say fail fast. You're gonna fail. You're gonna screw up. Just do it fast and move on, and don't like cry about it. Like, I mean, it's just you're gonna make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. I always say this to younger guys. I'm like, look, like if you're gonna be an entrepreneur in your 20s, like just get out there, try things, make those mistakes, learn. My first 2 years in the rental business, I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the stories. It was such a disaster at times. I had multiple cars stolen. This was before we had GPS trackers. I do take pride in the fact that I stole my cars back, but I mean, I mean, there's a lot of, whenever you start any business, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Just, understand that things are going to go wrong. It's never pretty, but just keep moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great advice. And I also recommend GPS trackers for Carshare.
Definitely recommend GPS trackers.
Yeah.
That technology didn't come about until about 6 years ago. So unfortunately, when I first started, we didn't really have that technology, but I would definitely recommend kill switches and GPS.
For sure, for sure. Well, Alex, those were all the questions that I had. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with
Thanks for
car
having me.
sharing, for your advice, and yeah, wish you all the very best in your new role and also your businesses.
Thank you. You as well.